Have you ever had one of those moments where a single act of kindness completely changed the course of your life? I'm talking about those split-second decisions where you choose to do what's right, even when it might cost you everything. Maybe you stood up for someone being treated unfairly, or maybe you witnessed someone else take that brave stand. Those moments have a way of revealing who we really are, don't they? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from tonight, because this story about unexpected courage is going to stay with you long after it's over. Lucia Santangelo had always believed that life was something that happened to other people. Good things, bad things, extraordinary things. At 26, she'd grown accustomed to being invisible, blending into the background of other people's stories, while her own remained frustratingly ordinary. She wiped down the same tables, served the same demanding customers, and counted the same meager tips night after night at Bellecourt, one of Chicago's most exclusive Italian restaurants. Tonight felt no different as she hurried between tables, her black uniform crisp despite the humidity clinging to her skin from the kitchen's heat. The dinner rush was in full swing, and every server was drowning in orders from clientele who wore watches worth more than Lucia made in 6 months. She'd learned not to stare too long at the designer handbags or perfectly manicured nails of the women who barely acknowledged her existence, focusing instead on the simple mathematics of survival. Rent was due in 5 days. Her student loans wouldn't defer themselves forever. The electric bill had already received one extension. The restaurant's opulent atmosphere felt like a beautiful cage some nights. Rich burgundy walls lined with authentic Italian artwork, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables draped in pristine white linens, the soft murmur of conversations in multiple languages creating an exclusive symphony she could hear but never truly join. She was part of the machinery that made this world function smoothly, invisible until something went wrong. Her section was nearly full when she noticed the little girl sitting alone at table 12 near the floor-to-ceiling windows. The child couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dark curls escaping from a neat ponytail and enormous brown eyes that seemed too serious for her young face. An elegant woman in her 50s sat across from her, checking her phone with obvious impatience. That's unusual, Lucia thought, slowing her pace as she passed their table. Children were rare at Bellecourt, especially during evening service. The little girl was picking at an appetizer of bruschetta, her small hands careful and precise as she ate. Everything about her spoke of careful training in manners and behavior, from the way she sat with perfect posture to how she dabbed her mouth with the cloth napkin after each bite. The woman looked up as Lucia approached a nearby table. Nanny, Lucia realized, noting the subtle difference in clothing quality and the way the woman's attention remained divided between the child and her phone. She'd seen enough wealthy families pass through Bellecourt to recognize the dynamic. Where are her parents? Lucia wondered, feeling an unexpected tug of sympathy. The little girl's dress was clearly expensive, a navy blue creation that probably cost more than Lucia's weekly salary, but there was something achingly lonely about the way she sat so still and quiet, waiting for adults who weren't there. Lucia was carrying a tray of drinks to table 15 when she heard Marcus Kellerman's voice rising above the gentle restaurant chatter. The assistant manager's tone carried that particular edge that made every server's stomach clench with dread. She followed the sound to see Marcus standing over table 12, his face red with barely contained fury. The little girl had knocked over her water glass. It wasn't a large spill, just enough to spread across the pristine white tablecloth and drip slowly onto the polished hardwood floor. The child sat frozen in her chair, her brown eyes wide with terror as Marcus loomed over her. "You clumsy little brat," Marcus was saying, his voice low but cutting. "Do you have any idea how much this tablecloth costs? How much it costs to have the floors refinished when careless children make messes?" The nanny had risen from her seat, her face pale as she fumbled for her purse. "I'm so sorry," she stammered. "Please, let me pay for any cleaning costs." Sophia apologized to the gentleman immediately. Sophia. The name fit her perfectly, Lucia thought, even as her chest tightened with anger at the scene unfolding before her. The little girl was trembling now, fat tears rolling down her cheeks as she whispered an apology that seemed to satisfy no one. "This is exactly why we don't allow children during dinner service," Marcus continued, his voice growing louder and drawing attention from nearby tables. Your father should have known better than to make a reservation for a child who clearly can't behave appropriately in an establishment like this. Lucia felt her feet moving before her brain had fully processed the decision. She set her tray down at the nearest station and walked directly toward table 12. Her heart pounding with the kind of righteous fury she hadn't felt since her own childhood spent defending her younger sister from playground bullies. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Marcus turned toward her, his expression shifting to irritation at being interrupted. "This doesn't concern you, Lucia," he said dismissively. "Return to your section immediately." But Lucia was already moving past him, kneeling down beside Sophia's chair so they were at eye level. "Hey there," she said softly, her voice gentle and warm. "Accidents happen to everyone, sweetheart. I spill things all the time." Sophia's tears slowed as she looked into Lucia's face, finding kindness instead of anger there. "Really?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Really?" Lucia confirmed, reaching into her apron for a clean cloth napkin. "Just last week, I dropped an entire tray of glasses right in the middle of the dining room. Made a noise like a thunderstorm. But you know what I learned?" "What?" Sophia asked, leaning slightly forward despite her fear. "I learned that the people who matter, the people worth knowing, they don't get angry about accidents. They help clean up the mess and move on to more important things. Like whether the bruschetta was delicious, or what your favorite subject is in school." Sophia's face brightened slightly. "I like art class best. And the bruschetta was really good." Lucia smiled, carefully dabbing at the water on the table. "Art class sounds wonderful. I bet you're very talented." Marcus's voice cut through their quiet conversation like a blade. "Lucia, I told you to return to your section. Stop encouraging this behavior and let me handle the situation appropriately." She stood slowly, turning to face Marcus with a calm that surprised even her. "The situation is handled, Marcus. It was an accident." Sophia apologized. "Now we clean up and move on. Don't tell me how to manage my restaurant," Marcus snapped, his face growing redder. "This child and her caregiver are disrupting other guests with their carelessness. Perhaps they should finish their meal elsewhere." Lucia felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced years ago when she decided to become a teacher before financial reality forced her into the service industry instead. She thought about every time she'd watched Marcus humiliate servers over minor mistakes, every cruel comment he'd made to employees who couldn't afford to fight back. "No," she said quietly, but with absolute conviction. "No, Marcus. She's 8 years old. She spilled water, not blood. And if you think terrorizing a child over an accident is appropriate management of anything, then maybe you should reconsider what kind of person you want to be." The restaurant had gone quiet around them. Lucia was dimly aware of other diners watching the confrontation, but her focus remained locked on Marcus's shocked face. No one had ever challenged him so directly, least of all a server who needed her job to survive. "You're fired," Marcus said, his voice shaking with rage. "Clean out your locker and get out. I don't ever want to see you in this restaurant again." Lucia felt the bottom drop out of her stomach, the reality of unemployment hitting her like a physical blow. But when she looked down at Sophia's face, still streaked with tears but no longer frozen with terror, she knew she'd made the right choice. "It's okay," she told Sophia gently. "Sometimes doing the right thing costs us something, but that doesn't make it wrong." She was gathering her composure to make as dignified an exit as possible when she heard a new voice from behind her. Low, controlled, carrying the kind of quiet authority that made people instinctively straighten their spines. "Is there a problem here?" Lucia turned to see a man approaching their table, and the word that immediately came to mind was dangerous. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with the kind of perfectly tailored Italian suit that whispered rather than shouted its expense. His dark hair was styled with casual precision, and his olive skin spoke of Mediterranean heritage. But it was his eyes that made Lucia's breath catch, a striking green-gray that seemed to miss nothing as they moved from Marcus to Sophia to her own face. Sophia launched herself from her chair with a cry of "Papa!" wrapping her small arms around the man's legs with the desperate relief of a child who had been waiting far too long for rescue. The man's entire demeanor softened as he knelt to embrace his daughter, one large hand stroking her dark curls, while the other tilted her chin up so he could examine her tear-stained face. "What happened, Piccolina?" he asked softly, his accent faintly Italian but clearly American-born. "I spilled water, Papa," Sophia whispered, fresh tears threatening. "The man got angry and said mean things. But the nice lady helped me and said accidents happen to everyone." Those green-gray eyes lifted to meet Lucia's, and she felt something electric pass between them, recognition of some kind though they'd never met. "Thank you," he said simply, but the depth of gratitude in those two words made her chest tight. Then he rose to his full height and turned his attention to Marcus, and Lucia watched the temperature in the room drop several degrees. "I'm Adriano Moretti," he said, his voice still quiet but carrying undertones that made Marcus go pale. "I believe you were saying something about my daughter?" Marcus was stammering now, his earlier bravado evaporating under Adriano's steady gaze. "Mr. Moretti, I apologize, I didn't realize. The spill was cleaned up immediately, of course. No harm done whatsoever." "No harm done," Adriano repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting perspective. My daughter appears to have been crying. Her nanny tells me a member of your staff shouted at an 80-year-old child over spilled water. But no harm done." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "And then I arrived to discover that the person who defended my daughter from this treatment has been terminated for her kindness. Still no harm done?" Marcus was sweating now, clearly recognizing something about Adriano Moretti that Lucia had missed. The name should have been familiar, she realized. Moretti Construction was one of Chicago's largest contractors, their signs visible on half the major building projects in the city. But there was something else, some undercurrent of power that went beyond legitimate business success. "Mr. Moretti, please understand," Marcus began. But Adriano raised one hand and the assistant manager's voice died instantly. "What's your name?" Adriano asked Lucia, his attention shifting to her with an intensity that made her heart race for reasons she couldn't identify. "Lucia Santangelo," she managed, proud that her voice remained steady. "Miss Santangelo, do you have other employment lined up?" "No, sir," she admitted, wondering why she was answering so honestly. "I needed this job." Adriano nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. "Sophia," he said without taking his eyes off Lucia's face. "What did you think of Miss Santangelo?" "She was nice to me, Papa," Sophia said immediately. "She said I was talented at art and that accidents happen to everyone and that the people who matter don't get angry about spills." "Smart girl," Adriano murmured. "Miss Santangelo, my daughter is in need of a companion. Someone to spend time with her after school, help with homework, perhaps prepare simple meals. The position includes room and board in my home, plus salary commensurate with your education and experience. Are you interested?" Lucia stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You're offering me a job? Just like that?" "I'm offering you an opportunity to care for someone who clearly needs your kindness," Adriano replied. "Sophia has been without a mother for 2 years. She responds well to you, which is not common. The question is whether you're willing to take a chance on us." There was something in his voice, some hint of vulnerability beneath the controlled exterior, that made Lucia's protective instincts flare to life. She looked down at Sophia, who was watching their conversation with hopeful eyes, then back at Adriano's face. "Yes," she heard herself saying. "Yes, I'm very interested." Adriano smiled then, the first genuine warmth she'd seen from him, and Lucia felt her world tilt slightly off its axis. "Excellent. Isabella will give you the address. Plan to start tomorrow morning." He turned back to Marcus, who had been watching the exchange with growing horror. "As for you, I'll be speaking with the owner about tonight's events. I'm certain he'll be interested to hear how his staff treats children and employees." Then he was lifting Sophia into his arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead, while his daughter giggled with delight. "Ready to go home, Piccolina?" "Yes, Papa," Sophia said, then looked over his shoulder at Lucia. "Will you really come take care of me tomorrow?" "I'll be there," Lucia promised, still reeling from how quickly her life had just changed. As the Moretti family left the restaurant, Isabella pressed a business card into Lucia's hand with an address in Lincoln Park, one of Chicago's most expensive neighborhoods. "Mr. Moretti expects you at 8 in the morning," she said kindly. "Sophia is excited to have you there." Lucia stood in the middle of Bellacourt's dining room, unemployed but somehow employed again, watching the taillights of Adriano Moretti's car disappear into the Chicago night. She had no idea what she'd just agreed to, no understanding of the world she was about to enter. All she knew was that a little girl with sad brown eyes needed someone to care about her, and that her father had the most beautiful and dangerous smile she'd ever seen. The address Isabella had given her led to a gleaming high-rise in Lincoln Park that made Lucia question whether she'd copied the numbers correctly. She stood on the sidewalk at 7:45 the next morning, clutching her single duffel bag and fighting the urge to turn around and walk back to her studio apartment. The doorman was already watching her through the glass lobby, probably wondering if she was lost. "You can do this," she told herself firmly. "Sophia needs someone who cares about her, and you need a job." Simple mathematics. But nothing about Adriano Moretti felt simple, and as the elevator climbed to the 32nd floor, Lucia found herself remembering the way his green-gray eyes had seemed to see straight through her last night. There had been something magnetic about his presence, something that made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with attraction she had no business feeling. The elevator doors opened directly into a private foyer, and Lucia stepped onto marble floors that probably cost more than she'd made in the past year. The penthouse stretched before her like something from a magazine, all floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Lake Michigan and the Chicago skyline. Modern furniture in rich browns and creams filled spaces that seemed designed for entertaining, while original artwork lined walls painted in sophisticated neutrals. "This isn't a home," she thought, taking in the pristine perfection. "This is a showcase." "Papa, she's here?" Sophia's voice called from somewhere deeper in the apartment, followed by the sound of small feet running across hardwood floors. Sophia appeared around a corner wearing a school uniform of navy blazer and plaid skirt, her dark curls bouncing as she launched herself at Lucia with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting for hours rather than minutes. "You came," Sophia said, wrapping her arms around Lucia's waist. "I was worried you might change your mind." Lucia knelt to Sophia's level, smoothing the child's hair with gentle hands. "I told you I'd be here, didn't I? I keep my promises." The warmth in Sophia's brown eyes was worth every second of doubt Lucia had experienced on the elevator ride up. This little girl had been abandoned by too many adults already. She needed someone consistent, someone who would choose to stay. "Good morning, Miss Santangelo." Lucia looked up to find Adriano emerging from what appeared to be a home office, phone pressed to his ear as he finished a conversation in rapid Italian. Even at 8 in the morning, he was perfectly dressed in charcoal slacks and a white dress shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His hair was still damp from a shower, and Lucia caught a hint of expensive cologne as he moved closer. "See, handled it personally last night," he was saying into the phone. The message was received clearly. No further action required. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket, giving Lucia his full attention. "I trust you found the building without difficulty? Your doorman looked like he was ready to call security when he saw me," Lucia admitted, rising to her feet. "I think my duffel bag failed to meet the building's usual standards." Adriano's mouth quirked upward in what might have been amusement. "Giuseppe has worked here for 15 years. He's protective of all residents, but he'll warm up once he realizes you belong here." The word belong made something flutter in Lucia's chest, though she couldn't have said why. She didn't belong in places like this, among people who casually owned penthouses and wore watches that cost more than most people's cars. "Come," Sophia said, tugging on Lucia's hand. "I want to show you everything. My room, the kitchen, the library. Papa has hundreds of books." As Sophia led her on an impromptu tour, Lucia tried to process the sheer scale of the space. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with professional-grade appliances, a dining room that could seat 12, and a living room that felt larger than most entire apartments. Sophia's bedroom was the only space that looked truly lived in, with art supplies scattered across a white desk and stuffed animals arranged on a canopy bed. "This is where you'll sleep," Sophia announced, pushing open a door near her own room. "Do you like it?" Lucia stepped into the guest bedroom and felt her breath catch. The room was larger than her entire studio apartment, with a king-sized bed, sitting area, and private bathroom that featured both a soaking tub and separate shower. The windows offered views of the lake that would be stunning at sunset. "It's beautiful, Sophia," she said honestly. "More beautiful than anywhere I've ever lived." Sophia beamed with pride, as if she'd personally designed the space. "Papa said you might want to change things if you don't like how they're arranged. He said making you comfortable was the most important thing." The casual mention of Adriano's consideration for her comfort made Lucia's chest tighten, with an emotion she couldn't quite name. When was the last time anyone had worried about whether she was comfortable? They finished the tour in the kitchen, where Sophia immediately began showing Lucia where everything was stored with the efficiency of a child who'd learned to be self-sufficient. "Cereal is here, milk in the refrigerator, bread for toast in this drawer. I can make my own breakfast usually, but Papa says you might want to cook real food sometimes." "What kind of real food do you like?" Lucia asked, already planning simple meals that might bring more warmth to this beautiful but sterile space. "Pasta," Sophia said immediately, "and pancakes, and anything that doesn't come from a box or delivery bag." The wistful quality in Sophia's voice made Lucia's heart ache. This child had been living like a small adult, taking care of herself while her father worked and her nanny managed schedules. She needed someone to fuss over her, to pack special lunches and remember her favorite bedtime stories. "Well then," Lucia said, opening the refrigerator to examine its contents, "we should probably start with pancakes this morning. What do you think?" Sophia's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You know how to make them from scratch?" "My nana taught me when I was about your age," Lucia said, gathering ingredients. She said pancakes made with love taste different than pancakes made from boxes. As Lucia mixed batter and heated a skillet, Sophia perched on a bar stool at the kitchen island, chattering about school and friends and teachers with the enthusiasm of someone finally having an adult's full attention. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, and Lucia found herself relaxing into the rhythm of caring for this sweet, lonely child. She was flipping the third pancake when Adriano appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the sound of Sophia's laughter. He leaned against the frame watching them, and when Lucia glanced up, she found his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her hands tremble slightly. "Something smells incredible in here," he said, his voice carrying a warmth she hadn't heard before. "Lucia's making real pancakes, Papa," Sophia announced. "From scratch like her grandmother taught her." "Is she now?" Adriano murmured, moving closer to the island. His presence seemed to fill the kitchen, making Lucia hyper-aware of his proximity as she continued cooking. "Would you like some?" she found herself asking, though she wasn't sure where the invitation had come from. "I don't usually eat breakfast," he said, but he was already reaching for plates from a cabinet, moving around the kitchen with the casual ease of someone comfortable in his own space. "Papa's always too busy for breakfast," Sophia confided to Lucia in a stage whisper. "He drinks coffee and makes phone calls and leaves for work." "Maybe today can be different," Lucia suggested gently, serving pancakes onto 3 plates. "Sometimes the best days start when we change our routines." They sat together at the kitchen island, and Lucia watched Adriano's face transform as he tasted the first bite. The controlled mask he wore slipped slightly, revealing something younger and more vulnerable underneath. "These are exceptional," he said quietly. "When did you learn to cook?" "My nana believed that food was love made visible," Lucia replied, cutting Sophia's pancakes into manageable pieces. "She taught me that taking care of people through cooking was one of life's greatest gifts." Something shifted in Adriano's expression, a recognition or longing that made Lucia's breath catch. "Sophia needs that kind of care," he said, his voice rough around the edges. "She's been without a mother's touch for too long." The words hung between them, weighted with loss and hope in equal measure. Lucia wanted to ask what had happened to Sophia's mother, but the pain in Adriano's eyes warned her away from the subject. "Mama used to make pancakes too," Sophia said suddenly, her voice small, before the accident. But I don't remember the taste anymore. Adriano's hand covered his daughter's smaller one, and Lucia saw him struggle to maintain composure. Your mama made the best pancakes in Chicago, Piccolina. She would have loved Miss Lucia's recipe. The moment stretched between them, heavy with grief and possibility. Lucia felt like an intruder in their private pain, but also strangely honored that they would share this vulnerability with her. Adriano's phone buzzed against the counter, breaking the spell. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened back into business mode. I have to take this, he said, rising from the stool. Sophia, finish your breakfast. Miss Lucia will walk you to school. He disappeared toward his office, but Lucia could hear his voice through the partially open door, speaking in Italian with someone who clearly brought out his more dangerous side. The words were too rapid for her limited understanding, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. Papa has important work, Sophia explained matter-of-factly, apparently accustomed to these sudden shifts. He keeps people safe, but sometimes he has to be scary to do it. What kind of work does he do? Lucia asked carefully, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Construction mostly, Sophia said, swinging her legs from the tall stool. But also other things. Grown-up things that he doesn't talk about with me. The vague answer combined with the threatening phone conversation made Lucia's stomach tighten with unease. She'd been so focused on Sophia's needs and her own desperate employment situation that she hadn't properly considered what kind of man could afford a Lincoln Park penthouse on a construction worker's salary. As she walked Sophia to the exclusive private school 6 blocks away, Lucia found herself studying the other children and parents, noting the expensive cars and designer clothes that marked this world as completely foreign to her own upbringing. Sophia fit seamlessly into the environment, greeting classmates with easy confidence, while Lucia felt increasingly out of place in her simple black pants and white blouse. Walking back to the penthouse alone, she tried to reconcile the tender father who'd shared pancakes with his daughter with the man she'd overheard making veiled threats over the phone. Adriano Moretti was clearly more than a successful contractor, but exactly what that meant remained unclear. The penthouse felt different without Sophia's cheerful presence, larger and more intimidating. Lucia spent the morning exploring more thoroughly, noting details she'd missed during the initial tour. No family photographs anywhere except Sophia's room. Minimal personal touches despite the expensive furnishings. Security cameras in the lobby and elevator that she hadn't noticed before. She was unpacking her few belongings in the guest bedroom when she heard Adriano return, his voice carrying from the foyer as he spoke with someone about delivery schedules and payment terms. Normal business conversation, but something about his tone suggested the consequences of missing those schedules might be more severe than typical commercial penalties. By the time Sophia returned from school that afternoon, Lucia had prepared a simple dinner of pasta with homemade sauce, filling the kitchen with aromas that made the penthouse feel more like a home. Sophia's delight at finding a real meal waiting was worth every moment of uncertainty Lucia had experienced throughout the day. They were setting the dining room table together when Adriano appeared, loosening his tie as he took in the domestic scene before him. You've been cooking again, he observed, but there was appreciation rather than criticism in his voice. Sophia insisted on a proper family dinner, Lucia explained, smoothing the tablecloth with nervous hands. I hope that's all right. More than all right, Adriano said quietly. This is exactly what she needs. As they sat down to eat together, Lucia felt the same shift in atmosphere she'd experienced that morning. The formal distance Adriano maintained dissolved when he focused on his daughter, replaced by warmth and genuine affection that transformed his entire demeanor. He listened to Sophia's stories about school with complete attention, asked thoughtful questions about her art project, and praised her improved reading skills with obvious pride. But it was when their eyes met across the table during one of Sophia's animated stories that Lucia felt something electric pass between them again. A recognition of mutual attraction that had nothing to do with their professional relationship and everything to do with the way he looked at her mouth when she smiled, the way her pulse quickened when he leaned closer to pass the salt. This is dangerous, she thought, even as she found herself hoping dinner would last forever. Falling for her employer was a complication she couldn't afford, especially when she still didn't understand what kind of work really paid for penthouse apartments and private school tuition. But as Adriano helped clear the dishes while Sofia completed homework at the kitchen island, his shoulder brushing against hers as they moved around the space, Lucia realized that danger might be the least of her concerns. The way he looked at her suggested she wasn't the only one feeling the pull of attraction, and that realization was far more terrifying than any questions about his business dealings. 3 weeks into her new life, Lucia had settled into a routine that felt almost normal, almost being the operative word, because nothing about living in Adriano Moretti's penthouse could truly be called ordinary. She woke each morning to Sofia's excited chatter, prepared breakfast while Adriano made business calls in rapid Italian, walked Sofia to school through Lincoln Park's tree-lined streets, and spent her afternoons planning activities that would bring more joy into an 80-year-old's overly structured world. It was during the quiet evening hours, after Sofia had been tucked into bed with stories and songs, that Lucia felt most aware of the undercurrents in her new situation. Adriano would emerge from his office looking tired and sometimes troubled, accepting the plate she'd kept warm for him with a gratitude that seemed disproportionate to such a simple gesture. They'd begun talking during these late dinners, conversations that started with Sofia's progress, but gradually drifted into more personal territory. Tonight felt different somehow, charged with an electricity that made Lucia hyper-aware of every movement Adriano made as he sat across from her at the kitchen island. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing strong forearms that made her pulse quicken in ways she tried not to acknowledge. "Sofia seems happier," he said, cutting into the chicken marsala she'd prepared. "More like the child she was before her mother died," Lucia said gently. It was the first time either of them had directly addressed the loss that shadowed every corner of their lives. Adriano's fork paused halfway to his mouth, his green-gray eyes meeting hers with something vulnerable flickering in their depths. "Elena died in a car accident 2 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light on Michigan Avenue. Sofia was supposed to be in the car, but she had a fever that morning and stayed home with the nanny." The pain in his voice made Lucia's chest tighten with sympathy. She wanted to reach across the small space between them and cover his hand with hers, offer some comfort for a loss that clearly still felt raw. Instead, she sat quietly, giving him space to continue if he needed to. "Survivor's guilt is complicated for adults," Adriano continued, his voice rough around the edges. "For a 6-year-old who keeps asking why Mama went to the store without her, it's devastating. She's been afraid to get too attached to anyone since then, afraid they'll leave too." That explains so much about Sofia's initial hesitation followed by fierce attachment. The child was testing whether Lucia would stay, whether she could be trusted with a heart that had already been broken once. "She's not afraid anymore," Lucia said softly. "She knows I'm not going anywhere." "How can you be so certain?" Adriano asked, and there was something almost desperate in the question. "How can you promise something like that when life is so unpredictable?" The question hit closer to home than Lucia was prepared for, dredging up memories she'd been successfully avoiding for months. "Because I know what it feels like to have someone leave when you need them most," she found herself saying. "And I know what it feels like to have someone stay when leaving would be easier." Something shifted in Adriano's expression, curiosity replacing some of the pain. He set down his fork and gave her his complete attention in a way that made her pulse race. "You're thinking of someone specific?" Lucia hesitated, weighing the wisdom of sharing something so personal with a man who was technically her employer. But the vulnerability he'd just shown her seemed to demand equal honesty in return. "My ex-boyfriend Derek," she said, surprised by how steady her voice remained. "We dated for almost 2 years. I thought he loved me, thought we were building something real together. It took me too long to realize that what I mistook for devotion was actually control." Adriano's entire body went still, his eyes never leaving her face as she continued. "He started small, the way they always do. Comments about my clothes, my friends, how I spent my time when we weren't together. He'd show up at my work unexpectedly. Said he missed me and wanted to take me to lunch. Felt romantic at first, like he couldn't bear to be away from me." The memory of her own naivety made Lucia's stomach clench with familiar shame. How had she been so blind to the warning signs that seemed so obvious now? When did it change? Adriano asked quietly, and something in his tone suggested he was familiar with patterns of escalating control. When I started pulling away, Lucia admitted. When I began to realize that his love felt more like a cage than a choice. He couldn't handle the idea that I might want space or time with other people. The verbal abuse started slowly, little comments designed to chip away at my self-confidence. Then came the threats. Her hands were trembling now, she realized. The familiar anxiety that accompanied thoughts of Derek, making her heart race despite being thousands of miles and months away from their relationship. What kind of threats? Adriano asked. And now his voice carried undertones that made her look up sharply. There was something dangerous in his expression. Something that suggested Derek would regret ever crossing paths with Lucia Santangelo if Adriano Moretti had anything to say about it. He said he'd make sure I never felt safe anywhere, that he'd always be watching. When I finally got the courage to leave him, he followed through on those promises. He'd show up at my apartment, at my work, at the grocery store. Always just watching, never quite doing anything illegal enough for the police to help. But making sure I knew he was there. The words tumbled out faster now. Months of suppressed fear finally finding voice in the safety of Adriano's presence. He knew my schedule, my routines, my friends' addresses. I moved 3 times in 6 months trying to get away from him. Changed jobs twice. Nothing worked. That's why you came to Chicago, Adriano said, understanding dawning in his eyes. That's why I came to Chicago, Lucia confirmed. I thought distance would be enough. Thought he'd eventually lose interest and find someone else to terrorize. But he found my new address within 2 weeks. Started calling again, leaving voicemails about how I could never really escape him. Adriano was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists on the granite counter. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled but underlined with steel. When was the last time you heard from him? 3 months ago, Lucia said. Right before I started working at Bellacourt. He called to tell me he was planning a trip to Chicago. Said he missed me and wanted to talk. I changed my number the next day, but I know that won't stop him if he's really determined to find me. She looked up to find Adriano watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was fury in his expression, but it wasn't directed at her. Instead, she saw the same protective instinct that had emerged when Marcus had threatened Sophia, magnified and focused with laser precision. You should have told me about this sooner, he said quietly. Why? Lucia asked, though something in his tone made her pulse quicken with anticipation and unease in equal measure. Because Derek Hoffman is about to learn what happens to men who threaten what belongs to me. The possessive declaration should have alarmed her, should have triggered every warning bell about controlling men and dangerous situations. Instead, it made something deep in Lucia's chest unfurl with relief. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe. Adriano, she began, but he was already reaching for his phone. Marco, he said when the call connected, switching seamlessly to Italian. I need a full background check on Derek Hoffman, last known address Milwaukee. Also need surveillance on Miss Santangelo's previous addresses and current location. If this bastardo is in Chicago, I want to know about it before he takes his next breath. He ended the call and turned back to Lucia, who was staring at him with a mixture of gratitude and growing awareness that she'd stumbled into something far more complex than a simple nanny position. What kind of construction work do you really do? She asked quietly. Adriano studied her face for several heartbeats before answering. The kind that requires me to be very good at protecting the people I care about. Does that frighten you? It should, Lucia thought, but what came out of her mouth was no. It doesn't frighten me at all. The honesty of her answer seemed to surprise them both. Adriano reached across the counter and covered her hand with his, the contact sending electricity up her arm. His skin was warm, calloused in places that suggested he did more than just oversee construction sites. Good, he said simply, because I have no intention of letting anyone hurt you. The promise hung between them, weighted with implications that extended far beyond professional responsibility. Lucia found herself studying his face, noting the way his eyes darkened when he looked at her mouth, the way his thumb stroked across her knuckles as if he couldn't help himself. They were leaning closer to each other, the space between them charged with possibility, when Sophia's voice called out from her bedroom. "Papa? Lucia? I had a bad dream." They sprang apart as if they'd been caught doing something inappropriate, though technically they'd barely been touching. Adriano ran a hand through his hair, while Lucia tried to steady her racing pulse. "I'll go," she said, but Adriano was already standing. "We'll both go," he decided. "She needs to know we're both here." They found Sophia sitting up in her canopy bed, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched a stuffed elephant to her chest. The sight of both adults appearing in her doorway seemed to calm her immediately. "What kind of bad dream, Piccolina?" Adriano asked gently, sitting on the edge of her bed while Lucia settled on the other side. "I dreamed that Lucia went away like Mama did," Sophia whispered. "I dreamed that she said she had to leave and I couldn't make her stay." Lucia's heart broke for this child who'd learned too young that the people she loved could disappear without warning. She gathered Sophia into her arms, holding her close while making eye contact with Adriano over their daughter's head. "I'm not going anywhere, sweet girl," Lucia promised. "I'm going to be right here taking care of you and your papa for as long as you want me to stay." "But what if you change your mind?" Sophia asked, her voice muffled against Lucia's shoulder. "What if you decide you don't want to be our family anymore?" Lucia felt Adriano's gaze on her face as she answered, knew that her next words carried weight beyond comforting a frightened child. "Families don't work that way, sweetheart. When you choose to love someone, really love them, you don't just change your mind when things get difficult. You stay and figure it out together. Even when there are scary things," Sophia pressed. "Even when Papa has to do his dangerous work." "Even then," Lucia confirmed, though she was looking at Adriano now. "Especially then." Sophia settled back against her pillows, visibly calmer but still clinging to both adults. "Will you stay until I fall asleep? Both of you?" "Of course," Adriano said immediately, and Lucia nodded her agreement. They sat together in the dim glow of Sophia's nightlight, taking turns telling silly stories until the child's breathing evened out in sleep. But even after Sophia was clearly unconscious, neither adult moved to leave. There was something precious about this moment, this feeling of family that none of them had experienced in too long. Finally, Adriano stood and gestured for Lucia to follow him into the hallway. They walked toward the living room in comfortable silence, both processing the intimacy of what had just passed between them. "She's becoming attached to you," Adriano said quietly when they reached the windows overlooking the lake. "She's not the only one," Lucia replied before she could stop herself. Adriano turned to face her fully, his green-gray eyes searching her expression in the soft light filtering in from the city beyond. When he spoke, his voice was rough with controlled emotion. "This is complicated, Lucia. My life, my work, it's not safe for people I care about. There are things about me, about what I do, that would terrify most women." "Then it's a good thing I'm not most women," Lucia said, stepping closer to him despite every rational thought screaming that she should maintain professional distance. "You don't understand what you're saying," Adriano insisted, but he didn't step away. If anything, he moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. "Then explain it to me," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "Help me understand why someone as good as you pretends to be dangerous." "I'm not pretending anything," he said, his thumb stroking across her cheekbone. "I am dangerous, Lucia. I've done things, made choices that put me on the wrong side of the law. But everything I've done has been to protect my family, to build something better for Sophia." The confession should have sent her running. Instead, it made her press closer to him, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Nothing you've done changes how I feel about you," she said honestly. "And how do you feel about me?" Adriano asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Like I'm falling in love with you despite every logical reason not to," she admitted. The words hung in the air between them for several heartbeats before Adriano's control finally snapped. He leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, before capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted like hope and desperation in equal measure. Lucia melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, as she kissed him back with 2 years' worth of loneliness and longing. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was everything he'd been searching for without knowing it. They were lost in each other, in the feeling of finally giving in to weeks of building tension. When Lucia's phone rang from the kitchen counter where she'd left it, they broke apart slowly, both breathing hard as reality intruded on their perfect moment. The phone continued ringing insistently, and something about the late hour made Lucia's stomach clench with unease. "I should answer that," she said reluctantly, though she made no move to step away from Adriano's embrace. The phone fell silent, then immediately began ringing again. "Answer it," Adriano said quietly, but his eyes had hardened with the same dangerous expression she'd seen when he'd threatened Marcus at the restaurant. Lucia walked to the kitchen on unsteady legs, Adriano close behind her. The number on her screen was one she didn't recognize, but something about the timing made her certain she knew who was calling. "Hello," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Hello, beautiful. Miss me?" Derek's voice made her blood turn to ice, the familiar combination of false sweetness and underlying threat triggering every self-preservation instinct she possessed. She looked up to find Adriano watching her face, his expression shifting from concern to lethal fury as he recognized her reaction. "How did you get this number?" she managed to ask. "I have my ways," Derek said, and she could hear the smug satisfaction in his voice. "Took me a while to track down your latest hiding spot, but Chicago's not that big a city, especially when you're playing house with some rich guy in Lincoln Park." The implication that he'd been watching her, learning her routines, made Lucia's hands shake. Adriano stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his presence steadying her. "I'm not playing house with anyone," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. "I'm working, Derek. I have a job taking care of a little girl." "Right," Derek said with a laugh that made her skin crawl. "Taking care of someone else's kid while spreading your legs for daddy. How domestic of you, Lucia." The crude words made her flinch, but before she could respond, Adriano had taken the phone from her trembling hands. "Let me make something very clear to you, Derek," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "If you contact Miss Santangelo again, if you so much as think about her, I will end you. Am I understood?" There was a moment of startled silence before Derek's voice came through the speaker, no longer cocky but still defiant. "Who the hell is this?" "I'm the man who's going to hunt you down if you don't disappear from Lucia's life permanently," Adriano replied. "Consider this your only warning." He ended the call and immediately began dialing another number. "Marco," he said when it connected. "Derek Hoffman just made contact. He's in Chicago and he's been watching the building. Find him. Tonight." As Adriano barked orders in Italian, Lucia sank onto a bar stool, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and fear. Derek had found her again, was close enough to know where she lived and who she was with. The safety she'd felt in Adriano's arms just moments before seemed like a cruel illusion. But when Adriano finished his call and gathered her into his arms, when he pressed his lips to the top of her head and promised in a voice like steel that Derek would never hurt her again, Lucia realized that falling in love with a dangerous man might be the safest thing she'd ever done. 2 days after Derek's threatening phone call, Adriano announced they were taking a weekend trip to Sicily. Not a request, Lucia noticed, but a statement of fact delivered over breakfast while Sophia clapped her hands with excitement about seeing Nana Isabella. "My mother has been asking to meet you," Adriano explained, his green-gray eyes studying Lucia's face for her reaction. "She believes anyone important enough to live in Sophia's daily life should be properly welcomed into the family." The casual reference to family made Lucia's pulse quicken, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. A weekend away sounded wonderful, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Adriano's motivation had more to do with removing them from Chicago, while his people dealt with Derek, than any grandmother's curiosity. The private jet waiting at O'Hare confirmed her suspicions about the scope of Adriano's wealth and influence. This wasn't the lifestyle of a construction company owner, no matter how successful. As they settled into leather seats that probably cost more than her previous annual salary, Lucia found herself studying Adriano's profile while he reviewed documents from a briefcase that looked more like a mobile office. Sophia had no such concerns about their luxurious travel arrangements, pressing her face to the window as Chicago disappeared beneath them and chattering about all the places she wanted to show Lucia at the family estate. Swimming pool, lemon groves, the library where Nana kept books in 3 languages, the beach where Papa had taught her to build sandcastles. Listening to Sophia's excited descriptions, Lucia felt the knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. Whatever complicated realities surrounded Adriano's business dealings, his love for his daughter was absolutely genuine. And increasingly, she was beginning to believe that his feelings for her might be equally real. The estate in Palermo exceeded every expectation Lucia had tried not to form during the 8th-hour flight. Ancient stone walls enclosed gardens that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the Mediterranean, while the villa itself looked like something from a Renaissance painting. Olive groves and lemon trees created a tapestry of green against the brilliant blue sky, and the air carried the salt tang of the sea mixed with herbs growing wild along the stone pathways. Nana Isabella, Adriano's mother, emerged from the villa as their car pulled through the gates, and Lucia immediately understood where Adriano had inherited his commanding presence. The woman was in her early 70s but moved with the grace and authority of someone accustomed to being in charge. Silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon framed a face that had been beautiful in youth and remained striking in age, while dark eyes missed nothing as they took in Lucia's simple traveling clothes and nervous expression. Sophia launched herself into her grandmother's arms with the enthusiasm of a child secure in unconditional love, chattering in rapid Italian about the plane ride and everything she wanted to show Lucia. Isabella listened with obvious adoration, responding in the same musical language while her gaze moved between Lucia and Adriano with calculating intelligence. "Welcome to our home," Isabella said to Lucia, her English accented but precise. "Sophia speaks of nothing but Miss Lucia this and Miss Lucia that. I was beginning to think she had invented an imaginary friend." "She's very real," Adriano said quietly, his hand settling on the small of Lucia's back with possessive warmth. "And very important to both of us." The declaration sent heat spiraling through Lucia's body, but it was the approval she saw in Isabella's eyes that made her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. When had she last felt welcomed somewhere, accepted as part of something larger than herself? The weekend unfolded like a dream Lucia had never dared to imagine. Isabella proved to be a masterful hostess, drawing Lucia into conversations about everything from literature to cooking while sharing stories about Adriano's childhood that made him blush and Sophia giggle. The family dynamics were warm and genuine in ways that made Lucia ache with longing for something she'd never really experienced. Saturday evening found them walking along the private beach as the sun painted the Mediterranean in shades of gold and crimson. Sophia had fallen asleep in her grandmother's arms after a day of swimming and exploring, leaving Lucia and Adriano alone together for the first time since Derek's phone call. The waves lapped gently against the shore as they walked in comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts too complex for easy conversation. Finally, Adriano stopped near a cluster of rocks that created a natural seating area, turning to face Lucia with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Lucia asked, genuinely confused. "For giving Sophia something I couldn't provide alone. For making her laugh the way she did today. For helping her feel safe enough to just be a child again." The raw gratitude in his voice made Lucia's throat tight with emotion. She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the way the fading sunlight caught the gold flecks in his green-gray eyes. "She's an amazing little girl," Lucia said softly. "Any woman would be lucky to be part of her life." "I'm not talking about any woman," Adriano replied, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I'm talking about you specifically. About the way you've changed everything just by choosing to stay." The words hung between them as the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting them both in warm golden light. When Adriano leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, Lucia met him halfway in a kiss that tasted like salt air and possibility. This kiss was different from their first, deeper and more certain. Adriano's arms came around her waist, pulling her against him as she wound her fingers into his dark hair. She could feel his heart racing against her chest, could taste the wine they'd shared at dinner, and something else that was uniquely him. They broke apart slowly, both breathing hard as they rested their foreheads together. The beach stretched empty around them, private and perfect, but reality intruded in the form of Adriano's phone buzzing insistently in his pocket. He ignored it at first, his attention focused entirely on Lucia's face, but when it rang again immediately, his expression shifted to the controlled mask she'd learned to recognize as his business mode. "I have to take this," he said apologetically, pulling the phone from his pocket. The name on the screen made his jaw tighten. "Marco," he answered in Italian, walking a few steps away for privacy, but Lucia could hear the tension in his voice even without understanding the words. When he ended the call and returned to her side, she could see the controlled fury burning in his eyes. "What happened?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Derek broke into your old apartment in Milwaukee," Adriano said, his voice carefully controlled. "My people were watching it, but he managed to get past them somehow. Destroyed most of your belongings and left a message." "What kind of message?" Lucia whispered, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Pictures of you and Sofia at the school," Adriano replied, each word precise and lethal. "Along with a note saying he plans to take away everything I love, starting with my family." The threat made Lucia's blood turn to ice, but it was the way Adriano had said "my family" that made her chest tighten with something stronger than fear. He was claiming them, her and Sofia both, with the kind of possessive certainty that should have alarmed her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in months. "What do we do?" she asked, stepping closer to him. "We do nothing," Adriano said firmly. "I handle this. My people are already tracking him down, and when they find him, Derek Hoffman will never threaten anyone again." The casual promise of violence should have horrified her, should have triggered every warning about dangerous men and the women foolish enough to love them. Instead, Lucia found herself studying Adriano's face in the fading light, noting the way his protective instincts had transformed him into someone capable of eliminating threats with methodical precision. "You're not afraid of me," he observed, something like wonder in his voice. "No," Lucia said honestly. "I'm not afraid of you at all." "You should be," he said quietly. "Do you understand what I'm telling you about how this will end for Derek?" "I understand that you'll do whatever it takes to protect Sofia and me," Lucia replied. "And I understand that makes me feel safer than I've ever felt in my life." Something shifted in Adriano's expression, surprise and gratitude, and something deeper burning in his green-gray eyes. He reached for her again, pulling her into his arms with less restraint than before. "You're remarkable," he murmured against her hair. "Most women would be running by now." "I'm not most women," Lucia reminded him, the same words she'd spoken in his penthouse just days before. "And I'm not going anywhere." The walk back to the villa was charged with electricity, both of them hyper-aware of every touch and glance. Isabella met them at the door with Sofia sleeping peacefully in her arms, the domestic scene so perfect it made Lucia's chest ache with longing. "She's been asking for you," Isabella said to Lucia with a knowing smile. "Refuses to go to sleep until you read her a story." As Lucia tucked Sofia into the canopy bed that had been Adriano's as a child, the little girl sleepily requested her favorite story about a princess who saved herself instead of waiting for rescue. But halfway through the familiar tale, Sofia's drowsy voice interrupted with words that stopped Lucia's heart. "Will you be my mama for real someday?" she asked, her brown eyes serious despite her exhaustion. Lucia looked up to find Adriano standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he waited for her answer. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, the knowledge that whatever she said next would change everything. "I'd love nothing more than to be your mama, sweetheart," she said softly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Sofia's smile was radiant as she settled back against her pillows. "Good," she murmured. "Then we can be a real family like the ones in my books." "Sleep tight, little one," Lucia whispered, pressing a kiss to Sofia's forehead before dimming the lights. In the hallway outside Sofia's room, Adriano caught Lucia's hand before she could retreat to her own guest room. The intensity in his eyes made her pulse quicken with anticipation and nervous energy. "Did you mean what you told her?" he asked quietly. "Every word," Lucia replied without hesitation. The honesty of her answer seemed to break whatever restraint had been holding him back. Adriano cupped her face in his hands, studying her expression as if memorizing every detail. "I need you to understand what you're choosing," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My world is dangerous. My business puts everyone I care about at risk. If you stay with us, if you become part of this family, there's no going back to a normal life." "Then it's a good thing normal was never what I wanted," Lucia said, reaching up to cover his hands with hers. "What do you want?" he asked, leaning closer until she could feel his breath against her lips. "You," she admitted. A family with you and Sophia, regardless of what else comes with it." The words seemed to shatter his control. Adriano kissed her with desperate hunger, backing her against the stone wall of the hallway as she melted into his touch. His hands tangled in her hair while she pulled at his shirt, both of them lost in weeks of building tension finally finding release. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Adriano rested his forehead against hers. "Are you certain about this, Lucia? About us?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," she said honestly. He took her hand then, leading her toward his bedroom with slow deliberation that made her heart race with anticipation. The room was masculine and elegant, all dark wood and rich fabrics that spoke of old money and older traditions. But it was the tenderness in Adriano's touch as he slowly undressed her that made Lucia's eyes fill with tears. He made love to her like she was precious, like she was everything he'd been searching for without knowing it. Every kiss, every caress carried the weight of promises neither of them had spoken aloud yet. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the ancient bed, Lucia traced patterns on Adriano's chest while he played with her hair. The Mediterranean breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the scent of lemon blossoms and salt air through the open windows. "I love you," Adriano said quietly, the first time either of them had spoken the words aloud. "I love you too," Lucia replied, lifting her head to meet his eyes. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." They were still wrapped in each other's arms when Adriano's phone buzzed with an urgent message. He reached for it reluctantly, his expression darkening as he read. "What is it?" Lucia asked, though she could see the answer in the tension of his shoulders. "Derek sent another message," Adriano said, his voice deadly quiet. "This time to my personal number. He says he's coming for all of us, and next time he won't just destroy belongings." The threat hung in the air like smoke, but Lucia found that her fear had transformed into something harder and more determined. Derek had already stolen too much of her life. She wouldn't let him destroy the family she'd found with Adriano and Sophia. "Then we'd better be ready for him," she said, surprising them both with the steel in her voice. Adriano's smile was sharp and dangerous as he pulled her closer. "Yes," he said softly, "we will be." The call came at 3:15 on a Tuesday afternoon while Lucia was grocery shopping for dinner. Sophia's school appearing on her phone screen shouldn't have triggered immediate panic, but something about the timing made her stomach clench with dread as she answered. "Miss Santangelo, this is Principal Morrison from Academy Prep. I'm calling because Sophia's uncle came to pick her up about an hour ago for a family emergency, and we wanted to confirm the arrangements with you." The words hit Lucia like a physical blow, the grocery basket slipping from her numb fingers to crash against the supermarket floor. "Sophia doesn't have an uncle," she managed to say, her voice barely steady. "Who picked her up? What did he look like?" The description that followed made Lucia's blood turn to ice. Medium height, brown hair, claimed there had been an accident and Sophia needed to be taken to the hospital immediately. He'd been very convincing, the principal said defensively, had known Sophia's full name and mentioned details about her family that seemed legitimate. Derek. Somehow Derek had learned enough about their lives to convince the school he belonged there, and now he had Sophia. Lucia was already running toward her car, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial Adriano's number. When his voice came through the speaker, calm and controlled as always, she felt her composure shatter completely. "Sophia's been taken," she said, the words tumbling out between sobs. "Derek convinced the school he was family, said there was an emergency. Adriano, he has our little girl." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds before Adriano's voice returned, transformed into something deadly and controlled. "Where are you now?" "Driving to the school," Lucia said, taking corners too fast as she raced through Lincoln Park traffic. "I have to see if there are cameras, if someone saw which direction they went." "Go home instead," Adriano said, and she could hear him moving in the background, probably already mobilizing whatever resources he commanded. "I'm sending Marco to escort you. My people will handle the school investigation." "I can't just sit and wait," Lucia protested, her heart breaking at the thought of Sophia afraid and confused in Derek's hands. "She must be so scared. She doesn't understand what's happening. She's strong and smart, just like her father," Adriano said, and there was something fierce and protective in his voice that made Lucia's chest tight. "And Derek Hoffman just made the biggest mistake of his pathetic life. I'm going to find our daughter, Lucia, and then I'm going to end this permanently." The possessive way he said our daughter should have surprised her, but it didn't. In the weeks since she'd become part of their lives, the boundaries between professional and personal had dissolved completely. Sophia belonged to both of them now, and the thought of that precious child in danger made Lucia understand exactly why Adriano had chosen the dangerous path that had brought them together. Marco met her in the lobby of the penthouse building, his expression grim as he escorted her upstairs. The apartment that had become home now felt like a tomb, all the domestic touches she'd added seeming to mock her with their normalcy. Sophia's art supplies scattered across the kitchen island, her favorite stuffed elephant abandoned on the living room couch, her school backpack hanging by the door where she'd left it that morning. Adriano arrived 30 minutes later with 3 other men Lucia had never seen before, all of them carrying the same aura of controlled violence that surrounded her lover when his protective instincts were fully engaged. He gathered her into his arms immediately, and she felt some of her panic ease at the solid strength of his embrace. "What do we know?" she asked, pulling back to study his face. "Derek's been planning this for weeks," Adriano said, his green-gray eyes burning with barely contained fury. "He rented a warehouse space in Cicero 2 days ago, paid cash for 3 months in advance. My contacts at the school confirmed he had Sophia's class schedule, knew exactly when she'd be walking to the pickup area alone." The level of planning revealed by those details made Lucia feel sick. Derek hadn't just found them in Chicago. He'd been studying their routines, learning their vulnerabilities, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And she'd led him right to them by falling in love with Adriano and Sophia. "This is my fault," she said, guilt crushing her chest like a physical weight. "If I hadn't brought him into your lives, if I'd been honest about how dangerous he was from the beginning." "Stop," Adriano said firmly, his hands framing her face so she had to meet his eyes. "This is on Derek and Derek alone. He's the one who chose to terrorize you, to threaten an innocent child. None of this is your fault, cara mia." The Italian endearment, spoken with such fierce tenderness, made tears spill down Lucia's cheeks. She wanted to believe him, wanted to accept the absolution he offered, but the image of Sophia's terrified face wouldn't leave her mind. "We have to find her," she whispered. "We will," Adriano promised. "Marco's team is already en route to the warehouse. We have contacts in every emergency room and urgent care facility in the city in case he tries to make his story about a medical emergency believable. And I have people monitoring every highway out of Chicago." "What can I do?" Lucia asked, hating the feeling of helplessness that threatened to overwhelm her. "You stay here where it's safe," Adriano said, but there was something in his tone that suggested he already knew she wouldn't accept that answer. "No," Lucia said, surprising them both with the steel in her voice. "I'm coming with you. If Derek has Sophia, if he's doing this because of me, then I need to be there when you find them." "Absolutely not," Adriano replied immediately. "It's too dangerous. Derek is unhinged and desperate, and I won't risk losing you too." "You're not going to lose me," Lucia said, stepping closer to him. "But Sophia is going to need both of us when this is over. She's going to need to know that we came for her together, that we're a family who protects each other." Something shifted in Adriano's expression as her words sank in. She was right, and they both knew it. Sophia would need the security of seeing both her father and the woman she'd begun calling Mama working together to bring her home safely. "You stay behind me at all times," Adriano said finally. "You do exactly what Marco tells you. And if I say run, you run. No arguments, no heroics." "Agreed," Lucia said, though they both knew she'd do whatever was necessary to protect Sophia, regardless of any promises made now. The warehouse in Cicero looked abandoned from the outside, its broken windows and graffiti-covered walls blending seamlessly with the industrial decay surrounding it. But Marco's surveillance confirmed Derek's car parked behind the building, and thermal imaging showed 2 heat signatures on the second floor. Adriano's team moved with military precision, surrounding the building and cutting off all possible escape routes, while he and Lucia waited in an armored SUV half a block away. She watched him transform into someone she'd never seen before, checking weapons and coordinating with his men through an earpiece with the cold efficiency of someone accustomed to violence. This is who he really is, she thought, studying the controlled lethality in his movements. This is the man who built an empire through fear and force when necessary. And instead of being terrified, she found herself grateful that all that dangerous competence was focused on protecting their daughter. The call came through his earpiece after 20 minutes of tense waiting. "Target is on the second floor, northeast corner. 1 adult male, 1 child. Child appears unharmed but restrained." Restrained. The word made Lucia's vision blur with rage so pure it surprised her. Derek had tied up an 80-year-old girl, terrified her and bound her like she was nothing more than a tool for his revenge. "Go," she said to Adriano, her voice steady despite the fury burning in her chest. "Bring our baby home." The assault lasted exactly 4 minutes from breach to resolution. Lucia could hear everything through Adriano's open comm channel. The splintering of doors, Derek's panicked shouting, Sophia's voice calling for her papa, and then the sound that would haunt Derek's nightmares if he lived long enough to have them. The silence afterwards stretched for an eternity before Adriano's voice crackled through the radio. "Package secure. Target neutralized. Bringing our girls home." Sophia launched herself at Lucia the moment Adriano carried her from the building, her small body trembling with residual fear as she clung with desperate strength. "Mama," she sobbed, using the name she'd started calling Lucia in quiet moments. "I was so scared. The bad man said he was going to hurt you and Papa. We're here, baby girl," Lucia whispered, holding Sophia tight while Adriano's arms came around both of them. "You're safe now. No one is ever going to hurt you again." Over Sophia's head, Lucia met Adriano's eyes and saw the controlled satisfaction of a man who'd eliminated a threat to his family permanently. Derek would never terrorize anyone again, and while part of her should probably feel something about that loss of life, all she could manage was gratitude that the nightmare was finally over. The emergency room at Northwestern Memorial became their temporary sanctuary while doctors examined Sophia for injuries and trauma. Physically, she was unharmed, just some rope burns on her wrists that made both adults want to resurrect Derek so they could kill him again. Emotionally, she was shaken but resilient in the way children could be when they felt truly protected. "I knew you'd come for me," Sophia told them as she sat between Lucia and Adriano on the hospital bed, her small hands gripping both of theirs. "I knew my family wouldn't leave me with the bad man." "Never," Adriano said fiercely, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Family protects family, Piccolina. Always." As they waited for the final discharge paperwork, Sophia fell asleep curled against Lucia's side, while Adriano made quiet phone calls to ensure Derek's body would never be found and his disappearance would raise no uncomfortable questions. The casual efficiency with which he arranged such things should have alarmed her. But Lucia found herself listening with professional interest rather than moral objection. "This is my life now," she realized, watching the man she loved methodically erase evidence of justifiable violence. "This is the world I'm choosing, the family I'm claiming. And I've never been more certain of anything." When Adriano finished his calls and returned to sit beside them, Lucia met his eyes with new understanding. "I want to marry you," she said quietly, surprising them both with the directness of the proposal. "Lucia," Adriano began, but she placed her finger against his lips. "I want to marry you," she repeated, her voice stronger now. I want to adopt Sophia legally, give her my name alongside yours. I want everyone to know that we're a family by choice and by law, that no one will ever be able to separate us again. The vulnerability in his green-gray eyes made her chest ache with love. Even now, after everything they'd been through, he was still afraid she might change her mind about accepting his dangerous world. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "After today, after seeing what my life really involves, are you absolutely certain this is what you want?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Lucia said, leaning closer to him. "You and Sophia are my heart, Adriano. Whatever else comes with loving you, whatever dangers or complications, I want all of it. I want forever with both of you." The smile that transformed his face was brighter than anything she'd ever seen. Hope and joy and relief all tangled together in an expression so beautiful it made her eyes fill with tears. "Then marry me," he said, bringing her hand to his lips. "Make us a real family in every way that matters." "Yes," she whispered, and felt their entire world shift into place around that single word. Sophia stirred against her side, mumbling sleepily about wedding dresses and flower petals, making them both laugh despite everything they'd been through. "Smart girl," Adriano murmured. "She knew what we needed before we did." As they finally left the hospital together, Sophia secure between them and a future full of dangerous possibilities stretching ahead, Lucia realized that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories began with the simplest choice. To stay when leaving would be easier, to fight when surrender seemed logical, to claim a family worth protecting no matter what the cost. 3 months after the nightmare with Derek ended, Sophia's 9th birthday party filled the penthouse with laughter and chaos in the most beautiful way possible. The trauma that had shadowed her for weeks had gradually faded, replaced by the confident joy of a child who knew absolutely that she was loved and protected by the two most important people in her world. Lucia stood in the kitchen putting finishing touches on Sophia's requested birthday cake, a 3-layer chocolate creation decorated with edible flowers that had taken most of the morning to perfect. The domestic scene felt surreal sometimes. This life of luxury and love that had grown from a moment of defending a crying child in an upscale restaurant. But watching Sophia blow out candles surrounded by friends from school and family from Sicily, Lucia knew she'd never take a single moment of their happiness for granted. The party was winding down when Adriano called for everyone's attention. His voice carrying that particular note that meant something significant was about to happen. Sophia bounced excitedly beside him, clearly in on whatever surprise was coming, while Isabella smiled knowingly from her seat near the windows. "Before we finish celebrating Sophia's birthday," Adriano said, his green-gray eyes finding Lucia's across the room, "there's something else we need to celebrate. Something that will make our family official in every possible way." Lucia's heart stopped as Adriano dropped to one knee in front of their assembled guests, pulling a velvet box from his jacket pocket. The ring inside was magnificent, a vintage emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Lucia Santangelo," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You came into our lives like a guardian angel, protecting my daughter when she needed it most and loving us both even when you learned how dangerous that love could be. You've made us a family in every way that matters, and now I want to make it official." The room had gone completely silent, friends and family holding their breath as they witnessed this pivotal moment. Sophia was practically vibrating with excitement. Her hands pressed to her mouth as she watched her father propose to the woman who had become her mother in everything but law. "Will you marry me?" Adriano continued, his eyes never leaving Lucia's face. "Will you legally become Sophia's mother and my wife? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that choosing us was the best decision you ever made?" Tears were streaming down Lucia's face as she crossed the room to kneel beside him, her hands shaking as she reached out to touch his beloved face. "Yes," she whispered, then louder so everyone could hear, "Yes, of course, yes. Nothing would make me happier than being your wife and Sophia's mama forever." The ring slid onto her finger with perfect precision, as if it had been made specifically for her hand, which, knowing Adriano's attention to detail, it probably had been. Sophia launched herself at both adults, wrapping them in a hug that nearly knocked them over as the room erupted in cheers and applause. Now I get two mommies, Sophia announced to the room, beaming with pride. My first mama in heaven who watches over us, and my second mama here who makes pancakes and reads stories and keeps the bad dreams away. The innocent wisdom in her words made every adult in the room reach for tissues, including Adriano, who gathered both his girls into his arms with fierce tenderness. The wedding planning that followed was a whirlwind of decisions about flowers and music and guest lists, but the details mattered less than the joy that permeated every choice they made. Sophia threw herself into her role as maid of honor with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting her entire short life for this moment. She insisted on helping choose Lucia's dress, demanded input on the menu, and practiced her flower girl walk with such dedication that Isabella declared her the most prepared wedding party member in Moretti family history. They decided to hold the ceremony at the family estate in Sicily, surrounded by lemon groves and olive trees, with the Mediterranean providing a backdrop that seemed designed for new beginnings. The guest list was small but meaningful, close family and friends who understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary rather than simply attending another society wedding. The morning of the ceremony dawned perfect, all golden sunshine and soft Mediterranean breezes that carried the scent of jasmine through the villa's ancient windows. Lucia stood in the bedroom that had been Adriano's as a child, surrounded by Isabella and her sister who had flown in from Milwaukee, putting final touches on her appearance while Sophia supervised with the authority of someone taking her maid of honor duties very seriously. The dress was ivory silk that flowed like water over her curves, simple and elegant in a way that complemented rather than competed with the natural beauty of their surroundings. Isabella's grandmother's pearl necklace provided something old, while Sophia's carefully chosen earrings covered something new. The blue ribbon woven through her bouquet honored tradition, and the engagement ring that would soon be joined by its matching wedding band provided something borrowed from their shared future. "Are you nervous?" Isabella asked, fastening the pearl necklace with gentle hands while studying Lucia's reflection in the antique mirror. "Not about marrying him," Lucia said honestly. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I'm just overwhelmed by how perfect everything feels. How right this all is despite how unconventional our beginning was. The best love stories always begin in unexpected ways," Isabella said with a knowing smile. "My son was lost for 2 years after Elena died, carrying grief and responsibility without joy. You brought light back into his world, gave Sophia the mother she needed, and reminded all of us what family really means." The words made Lucia's chest tight with gratitude for the acceptance she'd found in this complicated, loving family. When Isabella placed the delicate lace veil over her hair, the transformation felt complete. She was ready to become Mrs. Adriano Moretti in every official way. Sophia led the procession down the garden path that had been lined with white roses and baby's breath, scattering flower petals with practiced precision while beaming at every guest. Lucia followed on Isabella's arm, having chosen to be escorted by the woman who had welcomed her as a daughter rather than walking alone. But it was the sight of Adriano waiting for her at the flower-covered archway that made her breath catch. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean waist, but it was the expression on his face that stopped her heart. Joy and love and something that looked like reverent gratitude all mixed together as he watched her approach. When Isabella placed Lucia's hand in Adriano's, the older woman whispered a blessing in Italian before kissing both their cheeks and taking her seat in the front row. The ceremony itself was a blend of traditional Catholic elements and personal vows that brought tears to every eye present. Adriano's vows spoke of second chances and guardian angels, of the way Lucia had transformed his house into a home and his existence into a life worth living. Lucia promised to love both him and Sophia fiercely, to embrace the complications of their world while building something beautiful within it, to choose their family every day for the rest of her life. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Adriano's kiss tasted like joy and promise and the rest of their lives together. Sophia's delighted squeal broke the romantic spell, reminding them that their love story had always been about 3 hearts becoming one family. The reception flowed seamlessly from ceremony to celebration, with tables arranged throughout the gardens so guests could enjoy the sunset over the Mediterranean while toasting the new Mrs. Moretti. Sophia's speech as maid of honor was the highlight of the evening, delivered with the confidence of someone who had never doubted this moment would come. When I was little and my first mama went to heaven, I thought families were something that got broken and could never be fixed, she said, standing between Lucia and Adriano at the head table. But then Lucia came to help the mean man at the restaurant, and she chose to love me even when I was scared to love her back. And Papa chose to love her even though his work is dangerous and complicated. And now we're a real family again, the kind where everyone chooses to stay forever. There wasn't a dry eye in the house when she finished, and even the normally composed Adriano had to clear his throat several times before he could respond. The dancing that followed felt like celebration of more than just their marriage, like acknowledgement that love could indeed triumph over fear and loss, and the complicated realities of imperfect lives. The evening ended with Sofia falling asleep in Isabella's arms while Lucia and Adriano swayed together on the temporary dance floor, surrounded by fairy lights and the soft sounds of family conversations. Tomorrow they would return to Chicago and the realities of Adriano's business empire. But tonight belonged entirely to love and hope and new beginnings. 1 year later, Lucia stood in the same kitchen where she'd first made pancakes for Sofia, her hands resting on the gentle curve of her growing belly, while she watched her daughter practice violin in the living room. Pregnancy had been kind to her, all glowing skin and boundless energy that made her feel more beautiful than ever. Sofia at 10 was confident and happy in ways that made Lucia's heart sing with pride. The trauma of Derek's kidnapping had faded to a distant memory, replaced by the security of knowing she was absolutely cherished by two parents who would move mountains to keep her safe. She'd thrown herself into preparing for the baby with the enthusiasm of someone who had always wanted to be a big sister, painting pictures for the nursery and practicing lullabies on her violin. The baby kicked against Lucia's ribs as if responding to Sofia's music, and she smiled as she imagined explaining to their son or daughter how their family had come to be, how Mama had once been a struggling waitress who chose to defend a crying little girl, and how that choice had led to everything beautiful in their lives. Adriano appeared in the kitchen doorway, home early from a business meeting that had involved acquiring another construction company rather than anything requiring his more dangerous skills. The empire he'd built through fear and force was gradually transitioning into something more legitimate, partly because he wanted their children to inherit something clean and partly because Lucia's influence had reminded him of the man he'd wanted to be before grief and responsibility had hardened him into someone else. "How are my girls today?" he asked, crossing to wrap his arms around Lucia from behind while pressing a kiss to the side of her neck. "Your girls are perfect," Lucia replied, leaning back against his solid strength. "Though I think your son might be training for soccer based on his activity level today." "Or daughter," Adriano reminded her, his hands splaying protectively over her belly. "Strong women run in this family now." They stood together listening to Sofia's violin practice, watching the snow fall outside their penthouse windows, while their unborn child moved restlessly under Lucia's skin. Life had settled into something beautiful and stable, the kind of domestic happiness Lucia had dreamed of but never dared hope she'd find. The peaceful moment was interrupted by Sofia's concerned voice from the living room. "Mama, there's a man outside the building taking pictures of people going in and out. Should I tell Papa?" The casual way their daughter had learned to notice and report potential threats should probably have concerned Lucia, but instead she felt proud of Sofia's awareness and confidence that her parents would handle any problems. This was their reality, this balance between normal family life and the constant low-level security that came with Adriano's world. Adriano was already moving toward the windows, his expression shifting to the controlled alertness Lucia recognized as his protective mode. "Probably just a private investigator hired by one of our neighbors," he said after studying the street below. "Rich people have complicated divorce proceedings that require documentation. But I'll have Marco check it out just to be safe." As he made the call to arrange additional security, Lucia marveled at how completely her definition of normal had changed. A year ago, the idea of living with constant security measures would have terrified her. Now it felt like a reasonable precaution taken by people who had something precious to protect. Sofia abandoned her violin to come cuddle against Lucia's side, automatically positioning herself where she could feel the baby moving. "I can't wait to teach them everything I know about art and music and how to tell Papa when we need extra security," she said with the matter-of-fact acceptance of someone who had never known a different kind of life. "You're going to be the most amazing big sister," Lucia said, pressing a kiss to Sophia's dark curls. "And they're going to be so lucky to have you looking out for them. Just like you looked out for me," Sophia replied, her words carrying the weight of absolute trust and love. As evening settled over Chicago and their family prepared for another quiet night together, Lucia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about the scared young woman who had intervened in a restaurant confrontation without knowing it would change her entire world, and marveled at how much courage she'd found when love gave her something worth fighting for. Their story had begun with an act of protection, and now as she watched Adriano and Sophia work together to ensure their family's security, Lucia realized they created something beautiful within the framework of his dangerous world. They were proof that sometimes the most extraordinary families were forged in the most unexpected circumstances, built by people brave enough to choose love despite the risks that came with it.